I just clicked the button, so it should show up soon. All good.
Yep.
All right. So, quick show of hands, both Richmond and Winston, who completed it completely? Right. And I'm guessing in Winston there's not a whole lot of hands up. That's okay. I want to first state it's okay. This one was deliberately designed to be tough. And it's supposed to really combine a lot of the things we've talked about over the 2 days. And if all goes to my plan here, it's actually the last exercise until we resume, which will be day 14 this coming Thursday. So it was designed to really compact a lot together. I saw there were different levels of completion in the room, and that's okay. Don't feel bad. I didn't actually expect everybody to just knock it out of the park in 1 minute, so don't feel bad about that. Second thing I want to mention, made a slight boo-boo when I described it. I definitely meant top 3 for when the customer has no favorites, top 3 as far as popularity in the database, but I didn't really define what I meant by top 3 for the customer. We had many people ask a very smart question, which is, what does it mean to be top? There's no such sort of thing as top 3 for a single customer. What I should have said as the presenter is we'll come with something like the most recent. So in my case, and I have it on the screen here, I would have done created at descending. So what we mean by top for them is their most recent. But I should not have said top. So if that confused you, that's my fault. Don't worry about that. But in the example I'm about to show of a potential answer, I'm going to go with descending on date. Because that's good enough. If you think about it logically, if we're working on a real product, we would probably be told in this scenario, go with their most recent favorite. Like that's the most recent thing they put in their I really want it box. So it's very likely it's the thing that they're trying to buy right now. Maybe. It's not always how it works, but it'd be a good inference. So this one's pretty tough. It was tough enough that I went ahead and typed up the whole solution during the exercise myself. And I have a solution that I'll walk through. I further want to stress that this one is so complex that there are a lot of right ways to write it. So many people are on different paths, and the way I did it is definitely not the one way. Plenty of critique could be made about it, but it does function per the spec to the best of my ability to test it. And it does combine a lot, so let's start looking at it. So the first thing I did, since we'd already talked about variables, I wanted to go ahead and put into a variable the one input we have, which is for that customer. Look at the spec here real quick. Create a product list for a single customer. Well, as soon as I said that and typed it in Slack, you probably should click for you that somewhere in there we're going to be having a hard-coded number. So for me, I put it right here at the top. Another reason I did this, and we'll talk about this more in a week or so, maybe a little bit more, when we talk about calling databases from real applications. We're going to be parameterizing everything. To avoid the SQL injection we talked about earlier, everything's going to be a parameter, and the parameters will generally take the same sort of, fill the same goal as this first line. So the query that will actually run from the code will be everything but this first line. So I definitely highly recommend doing this technique, getting whatever the inputs are at the top of your script as variables if you're writing code that will eventually be an app code. Just a little tip. If you didn't do it that way, that's fine. It's fine to hard code the number. That's fine. So we're going to need to do a couple things in a couple phases. We have to ask the question, does this customer have any of the... I see a lot of people frantically typing. Let me commit to, I'm going to put this one in Slack. So if you're typing it just to not lose it, I promise I will put it in Slack. I can tell those people under pressure try to type as fast as they can. Let's just talk about, if you want to type it, feel free, but don't feel the pressure. I've already got it saved as a file. I will put it in Slack. So let me relieve that pressure and keep going. So we know that we're going to have to ask the question, does the customer have any favorites? And if they do, give me some of them. Well, if you think about that, if we wanted to write this really inefficiently, or just without using any sort of table variables or temp tables, we would have to hit that favorites table twice. Right? We would have to sort of do the same logic twice. And just as a way to sort of show that we can kind of get out of that, although I didn't get out of it completely, I decided to go with the table variable. Remember, I'm selecting top 3, and I'm going to fill in this favorites table with those top 3, which means its maximum number of rows is 3. So table variables are generally going to perform just fine when the quantity of rows is small. 3 is a pretty small number. If I thought if it had to be top 1 billion, this probably should be a temp table. If you used a temp table, you're fine too. You did not do anything wrong. That works perfectly fine. There's no severe difference there to obsess over. So the very first thing I did, let me make sure I get just the right code on the screen. So I declared that table, and I immediately decided to fill it up. And what I filled it up with, I did what I would call an optimistic fill. So what I decided to do was, let's assume that the customer does have favorites and go ahead and put them all in this table per the spec. Because we're going to ask if that table has anything in it in just a moment. We're going to do an exist check really soon. But you can see the query I went with. So I immediately started with I'm going to highlight this as I think about it, so I can sort of show you what I did. From the favorites table, let's go ahead and put the products onto it, because we know we're going to want to get product ID and product name. So let's go ahead and join that on. Limit it by that customer, right? Remember that variable's at the top. It's currently the number 1, which is Bob in my database, but I will change that as we test it. And the part that I forgot to mention when I defined this, and I do apologize, I decided to use the created at date in a descending order as the topness for a single customer. So the most recent, when you order by date ascending, you get smallest dates first, which means oldest dates are at the top. So I did descending, DESC, so that the most recent dates are at the top. And you're going to find that in a lot of languages, a lot of databases. Go ahead and just memorize that. The later the date, the larger the number. So when you talk about sorting dates, by default you're usually going to sort ascending, which is oldest first. That's how it usually works in most languages. Just remember that pattern. It'll come in handy very often, whether you're a DBA or a developer or anything like that. So I decided, created at descending, that gives me my values. I just need products per the spec, right? We're just doing a product list on their landing page. So all I needed was product ID and product name, which I pulled out of that joined product table. And although I don't remember doing it, I think I did a top yesterday. I hope I did a top yesterday. I think I did. If I didn't, then now you're learning about it. But just to remind, the top 3 does exactly what it says. It will just take the top 3 out of the record set and ignores the rest. So it caps it at 3. If there's a 0 in the record set or 2, that's fine. It'll still return the 0 or the 1 or the 2, but it caps it at 3. You'll never get 4 back. So that gave me, optimistically, like if I knew that every single customer had at least one favorite, this is a much simpler script to write. I would just have returned this value, this record set. This would be sufficient. But I don't know. They could be empty, so I shoved that into that table variable. So that table variable now has either 0 rows, 1 rows, 2 rows, or 3 rows. And per the spec, remember, if they don't have any, we're going to do something special. And even when I say it out loud, even when I'm speaking English, I'm using the word if they have that, which probably means in the code we're going to type the word if. There's a very tight correlation there. If you're saying if in your brain, there's probably an if to type on the screen. So by this line, right after this order by, so right about where I have the cursor, we are in a position where we have a favorites table and it's optimistically filled as if everybody has a favorite. But we're not done. There's more code. I'm just going to show the exists real quick, just the very top of that. So I need to ask the question, do we have any? And here's the cool part. I don't have to re-ask the original table. Because I've pre-populated optimistically that table variable, I can just ask if it has any. Because if it does, then clearly that customer has something, and I can actually immediately return all those favorites. And that gets the job done. So from what I've showed you so far in this script, for all the customers that do have at least one favorite, that's the code that they get. They get the top of that runs, right? We get the table variable, we fill it in from the database. We do this as if exists check. It evaluates to true, and I'm just immediately selecting out from that favorites, and that's what gets seen. let me remove these results because I don't want you to see that just yet. Sorry. So that's the results I get streamed out to the app, in which case we're done. So we've actually covered one of the branches, right? We've covered the branch, the logical branch of if they have at least one favorite, we've actually written all the code. Now, unfortunately, that's not the whole spec. The spec was if they have no favorites, so if this exists is false, we got to do a whole different kind of work, right? Now it's going to be a popularity contest. Whichever of the products is most favorited by other people becomes my list on my landing page. And that's the harder part, but that occurs in this else. And I brought back out of my developer tool belt, my DBA tool belt, some of the things we've already talked about. I definitely start with the favorites table, got to start with that. Go ahead and join the products because I knew I needed the product IDs and names because that's the actual output column. So I go ahead and just type the join. But instead of having some sort of where clause, I'm using group again. So I group by the products because I want to find the most popular products. So I create of the whole favorites table a set of groups based on product ID. And because of the rule, the way group bys work, I had to also group on product name. Don't be distracted by that. That's just because I have it in the select, in the output list up here. So I also group by product name, but I want you to focus on product ID. But then I did something and I combined two things I've already showed you in the last couple of days, but I didn't tell you it was possible. And that is, you can have at the very end, you can order by the aggregation. And that aggregation does count for the groups. So that actually happens after the fact. Right, so it does order by the quantity, and I did it descending. Once again, these are integers, right? So if something's only been favorited once, it has a quantity of 1. If it's favorited 1,000 times, its quantity is 1,000. Well, that's the popular one, so I've got to order descending from big numbers to little numbers. Just like dates, the bigger numbers are going to be at the top when I'm doing descending. And then the very simple part, once again, I select top 3 out of the database. That is the end of my script. Okay, I'm going to re-show, because some of us have been playing with our data. Let me show you the data in my database, just so you know what we're talking about. In my favorites table, Bob here has 3 favorites, Alice has 1, Charlie has 3. I've changed up the product ID orders. It's 1, 2, 3, 1, and 1, 2, 3. I have a couple with special dates. You don't have to memorize the date on the screen. I'm just showing you that Bob has a lot of favorites, Alice has 1, Charlie has 3, but I'm actually going to show you the way my script works. I can actually put in invalid customer IDs and it actually still works. So I have customer ID of 1 at the top, which is Bob. I'm going to run that. This is Bob's list, and so I'm going to highlight this is the select that is returning values that we see right now, because remember, he does have favorites. So that's his list, and it is ordered in descending order, latest date first, as he favorited it. You just have to trust me on that because it actually takes a lot of effort to prove it. But I did test it. It looks to me like it's working correctly to the best of my ability to test it. I can try Alice. If you remember, Alice only has 1 thing favorited. So if this was working correctly, we should see 1 record. And it is. She only favorited the car. So we are using the table. The table gets populated for her. When her exist check runs, it's a yes. It's a thumbs up. And so we just grab out her favorites. They technically are ordered, but when you order 1 row, you just get the 1 row. So there's really no meaningful ordering for that. Charlie is slightly different. Charlie also has 3, and you might not have memorized this, but his order is different from Bob, because their date stamps are different. Bob was car, laptop, camera. This one's laptop, car, camera. His laptop favorite came in later in life. So this is actually ordering by the descending date correctly. And I can tell because although they have the same set of favorites, they were favorited at different times and the order's coming in differently. So I've confirmed that this created at descending is actually working correctly, and we must be getting this one. And I know we must be getting that one because, and this is an artifact of my script, you can actually you could choose to call this a feature or a bug. You've probably, as you get more in development, there's a lot of jokes about features versus bugs. The feature of my script is that all customer IDs work even if they're invalid. There is no customer 999 in my database, but it actually works. In this case, we do 999. we do this select, it runs but returns 0 rows because that customer ID is actually non-existent in the favorites table. That means that the table variable named @favorites is empty, right? It's got the correct columns, but it's empty. So when I do this exist check, it's a false because it's got no favorites. No one has no, well, I can't say no one has no favorites. A non-existent person has no favorites, so it has no favorites, which means it goes to the else block and actually runs the popularity contest, and car is definitely the most popular favorite in my database. So I've used a lot of our techniques, right? We've used the brand new introduced if for control of flow, the new table variables, which is brand new to everybody. It's one of the last things I talked about. But you can see I'm sort of stacking on what we've talked about over the last couple of days. I'm reusing group bys, I'm using the order bys and the tops to sort of pick subsets out, since it's obviously a top 3 feature. And I've even kind of showed you with the group by and using count, you can run a popularity contest on your data and then output some cool stuff. I will put this one in Slack. Does anybody have questions based on your experience of doing this exercise or about my implementation, my solution? Clear in Winston? Cool. That one was a tough one. It's deliberately done to be tough because I knew it was going to be our last exercise until we come back for the 3rd day, which is later next week. I will definitely put the code up, but this sort of compounds a lot of the stuff we've learned about. I'm not doing any data modification in this script. There's no create, updates, or deletes. But as far as selection, I'm doing quite a bit here. And it's supposed to be quite advanced. I wanted to sort of get you to think about it, and I will put this in Slack and you can play with it later. As far as writing queries, that's actually it. And we'll use the remainder of our time today to learn about some other features of SQL before we have to go home. This is the last chance for a question about queries, and I'm about to close it.
I do have one special request.
Special request.
From Winston, that, and I don't know if this works. I think that you tried this earlier, but if the database diagram designer can be shown, kind of like with all the tables and relationships, if it works.
There were a number of things on my to-do list where I would go to the database diagram to show everybody awesome things, and when I tried this yesterday, it completely fell on its face, and it is doing that again.
Right-click that one more time, the database diagrams folder.
I want to point out something to you. You'll find it funny. There's now a window open that has like a GUID in its title, and doesn't exist. Way to go, Windows, right?
Try that one more time. Right-click on database diagrams, but this time select. There's a.
It disappears. I know what you're thinking.
Yeah, it said install the.
No. I have to go to a database that I never tried that on. You can see I've been trying it while nobody's looking.
No install diagrams for it.
The problem is it's the same pop-up. So I'm not optimistic. We'll let it do something. It's not doing anything. And so if I do new. Oh my goodness.
Alright.
Okay, well let me do that on the database we're talking about. Oh, I can't. They're dramatically different. What do people want to see?
Just the relationships, kind of like
those?
a visual representation of like the relationships and stuff.
Like a URD?
Yeah.
Here's what I can do. I'll create a new database. I'll script out what I have schema only, and we'll do the correct pattern for installing in that one. So you do not need to follow along. I'm going to do a golf database. My Foxtrot, I don't want to use the existing scripts because I've actually changed the schema a little bit, so I actually have to regenerate these. I'll do all of them, that's fine. So I'm doing what you saw earlier, where I'm going to script out just the schema of the whole Foxtrot. I'm going to try to put it in golf and see if we can get the diagram up. There were a number of cases where I wanted to show you guys diagrams as visuals, but I didn't think it worked. The only thing it couldn't do is put it in a new query window. That's pretty sad. I've saved all this, so I'm going to close it all and see if I can be more selective. Customer, favorite, and product is all I actually need.
It'll save as a file, maybe.
Yeah, I know. You're actually watching.
I've had the same experience with that, where it's always been a little flaky, like you
Sure.
sort of hold your breath when you use it.
You're actually watching how a lot of software gets built. It's a lot of, this doesn't work, how about this? This doesn't work, how about this? Copy. So far so good. We'll go to golf, open up that file. I was sneaky enough to save the URL. What? Try this again. We'll try Notepad++. This is software. I'm not kidding. This is, I spend a lot of my time trying 20 ways to do one thing that seems like it should be pretty straightforward. Obviously this program is happy with it. Can I copy and paste to a new window? It's as if golf is bad. I'm going to create a new one. It's called hotel. As if maybe I broke that one. Everything is dead.
Window, maybe the top, like new query at the top.
I'm reopening SSMS.
Yeah.
As I showed you, I don't know if you're paying attention, but when it fails, it opens some new window that has a title of a GUID that is inaccessible. Whenever Windows does something like that,
Yeah.
I'm a little worried that it's not actually going to be, that everything's broken forever until I reopen it. If this doesn't work, we should be very scared. Because I might be in a position where there we go. Still got it on the clipboard. Go to the top. It's waiting patiently. Get rid of Foxtrot. So I've got the schema. I have to do this very carefully. Install diagram support. I'm going to deliberately wait in case it's working hard on something but not showing me a diagram, and then we try it. Nice.
Yeah, all three at once. That's
What, is that too bold?
Yeah, I don't know, man.
Is that too aggressive?
The current state
3
of,
whole tables?
goes over.
You're good. So this is actually a great diagram. Yeah, see, wouldn't it be nice if I had solved that earlier? I did want to show diagrams earlier in the last 2 days. I'm putting them left to right, so you can sort of see. So you can see it draws little arrows. You can see the keys are the ones. It has infinity signs for many. Those are little sideways 8s right there. And you can kind of lay these things out. I actually do like to use database diagrams. And when I'm on a big project with hundreds of tables, lots of columns, I do like to spend a little extra effort either with this diagramming tool or other things like Visio or other tools that can diagram, and actually print those and put them on a wall. I find it's really kind of nice when other developers ask me for tips or something to go up and point and be like, oh, here's what we should do, here's what we should do. It's kind of easier to stand, and you can whiteboard, you can draw on it with a pen and reprint it. It's actually really good collaboration tool. Not to mention, if you're kind of visual, this is probably much easier to understand than what I've been showing you so far. I apologize for not getting that working earlier. Was there any follow-up to that, or did they just want to see the diagram? That's good enough? All right. Happiness. You can save the diagram, so if you lay it out, you can say my fave There you go, you can lay it out. Question?
So that's only going to work sometimes?
What do you mean by
that? Or should it work all the time, theoretically?
Oh, theoretically all the time. You know, it could be something wrong with my laptop.
You can create,
but
you can create schema. You can change the schema in there too. Like you can actually like
Can you do drag and drops?
Stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to unclick this, but I'm actually starting to draw a new relationship. You can tell it's kind of tracking. It's got the little plus sign, but I'm going to hit escape and not follow through on it because I don't want it to ask me questions. Theoretically, yes, it could be my laptop's problem, although I've had problem with the database diagramming in previous versions of SSMS. It's a feature that they don't prioritize. It's been a little unstable, but obviously it is possible to get it working, and I think it's worth it. We need some sort of diagram for big databases.
So the view designer, which should definitely work.
Views are in my upcoming last block.
Oh, okay.
And I have tried that on this laptop. I'm confident
Okay.
the view designer will work.
Okay.
Yep. We're about to talk about views right now, actually. That's my very next talk. Cool. So we got a cool new database with a design. I'm going to close out this script. Yeah, views are actually my very next thing, so might as well go right to it. So it's very common, and you don't need to follow the next step. So I'm just going to show you. You've actually seen me type a lot of things over and over in the last couple of days. I keep on using the same tables, just so I'm not pulling the rug out from under you. There's a lot of cases where I've typed very similar joins, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Once again, you don't need to follow along. There's nothing that I'm going to quiz you on here. Just reminding you of the tedium of watching me type this, which you've seen many times. Okay, it's just the IntelliSense. Control-Shift-R. There we go. So you've seen me actually type this many times as a baseline for something. If you think about it, there are a lot of cases, you know, in a the maximum I've showed you is 3 tables at work at any given query. We've created a total of 5 over the last few days, not counting the temp table, and that's a pretty small amount. But if you're on a project with hundreds of tables, and I've been on projects with literally hundreds of very large tables, wide in their column quantity and tall in their row quantity, you can kind of imagine there's a lot of queries that get typed over and over, or at least chunks of queries. So this from and this join might be typed 1,000 times in a product. Well, you can kind of deduplicate that. So we're going to be talking about, I don't know if it's been talked about much of the JavaScript. When I start talking about C#, you're going to see me really harping on a fact that code duplication is bad. A lot of, and reuse is good, to reuse some chunk. So the rest of today I'm going to be talking about ways to reuse stuff in SQL Server. In this case, I'm talking about portions of queries. It can be selects, updates, deletes, doesn't matter. One of the ways we do that is with a view. And I actually am going to use the view designer, which did work. There we go. It actually looks very similar in its pop-up. What I can do is I can select the same tables that you just saw me type manually, customer and favorite. I can add those. It does give me a similar visual to what we saw in the diagram. It's not identical because it has a little bit different functionality, but you can see it's still drawing that one-to-many for me. This is a little key icon on the left, little infinity sign on the right. It doesn't necessarily, actually it did seem to do a pretty good job of lining up the exact columns that it's joined on. That's a nice surprise. So what I can do, if I almost always am coming in on, let's say, customer ID and actually I'll just do star. Let me start with star. That's easy enough. All columns from both. You can see at the bottom it's actually starting to type a select statement for me, which is actually kind of cool. It's actually typed the join out. It is an inner join, which is good. I just did star on both, and it's actually writing a query for me. What I get to do, though, some people, by the way, use this designer and then copy and paste this. That's cool. I've seen people do that. But you can do something much cooler, which is to save this view. And I'm going to call it customers with favorites. Not a great name, but it gets the job done. Now, I'm going to remove the star. I'm going to select a few specific columns. It's complaining about the duplication of customer ID. So let me do...
If you used ID for your primary key, would that happen?
It's all about the foreign key name.
No, I know, but if you used ID as the primary key on all tables.
Yes, as long as the foreign key was not also yeah, because it wouldn't be duplicated. As long as the foreign key was, that would work. Yes. Oh, is that? I bet that.
So should one always use ID?
Oh, jeez! I knew this was coming. This guy's teasing me. I do have someone in the crowd. Let's try that. Very funny. You reeled me in on that one. That's good. So I ended up saving that favorite with a name, that view with a name, and I manually just drug over all of the columns except customer ID on favorite. This puts me in a position where I can come over to my query and do something else that's kind of cool. Give me a moment. Does that work? So I did the. I waited for the IntelliSense to refresh. I hit the hotkey, so we can see that customers' favorites is actually kind of like a table now. I can actually select from it. So I press F5. The columns are almost the same. Ignore that expression 1. I'm just showing you that you can take common sets of code, common sets of your query, and put them in views. And I'll show you some more advanced stuff you can do with it in just a second. But the number one thing is, remember here I had to do from favorite and join to customer on that join. And you guys have seen me type this predicate over and over and over, dozens of times in the last couple days. If you get tired of doing that in your own products, you can create these views, and then you can just select directly from them, and they've got all that already done. And you can reuse that in other queries. You can have some query somewhere else that's reusing it. And there's no rule. I'm going to go ahead and put CWF, customers with favorites. You get access to all of its columns, so you can filter on that, where customer ID equals 1. Now remember, I am running this against the hotel database, so I actually have no data. So you have to pretend that Bob was in there. Remember, for the database diagramming, I'm in a new database now. There's a whole lot you can do with views. I'm not going to talk about most of the things. I just want you to notice, even on the UI here, you can see you have a lot of control here. You can automatically put sorting in. One of the things that happens often as developers, we get the query right, but we forget the order by clause, and that's actually critical in some cases. With views, you can go ahead and put the order by in, get it ordering correctly, and reuse that view, and then you don't have to remember how to order it. So if you think about it, it's kind of just an abstraction over a set of tables, and saves you typing from that point on. You can get a certain set of joins and things correct right at the beginning. Obviously, you got sorting. We can do filtering. Filtering is the where clause. You can automatically put some of that in there. You can automatically give it aliases. I've seen people do this on databases whose names are really bad, or maybe have spaces and special characters. They'll use a view with the brackets to sort of turn it into a better name, and use the view for the rest of the development of that database for years. So views can be, they're a very powerful way, but they're called views for a reason. They don't actually store the data. This isn't a second set of data. It's looking at the real tables, but it allows you, and what it's actually doing on the fly, it just takes the query you're writing, and right in this part, it jams in all of this stuff as what I think they call a derived table. It might be its technical term. They do something fancy under the hood, so it actually just puts all that code in there, hidden away from you behind the view.
Ali was saying that the SQL down below is interactive, so you can actually put a table alias in there, and it'll change it for you and stuff.
A table alias or column alias?
Table alias, like C or whatever.
Does that work?
Yeah. See how it changed?
I did not do. All the C's popped right in there. That's just snazzy.
Yeah.
Right. It even the DBO is only on there once per table.
And
it actually
look
and it makes it look
at the top too.
cleaner.
It changed up in the
Yep.
visual.
C and F are in the titles in the top.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ali. Make a note of that one. Good tips. We're learning all the time. You'll be learning forever. That's a really good tip. I like that. I did know you could like type in the columns. I didn't know it was that active though. That's really cool. It's got this output checkbox, so you can actually perform filtering but then not have it in the output. There's a lot of flavors here. I'm not going to go through it much. This is just a discussion on one of the things you can reuse in SQL Server with native features is you can get yourself, sorry I'm clicking around, out of having to type a lot of things over and over. And views are the way to do that. Remember that they're called views for a reason. They're kind of like a window. You're looking at the real thing on the other side. They're not a copy of the data. They don't degrade performance in any way. It's just a view. It's a different way to look at something. Yep.
A lot of times a DBA will get a certain query really efficient with indexes and everything, and it's like, hey, all developers, I want you to use this particular query because it's optimized for efficiency, and they may make that into a view so that it's always using those, always hitting those indexes the right way.
Yep. Harper just made a great point for those in Winston. Sometimes a great DBA will put together a nice, concise set of great indexes and will then build views that use them really well and maximize the performance, and then just tell the people, developers writing queries and store procedures and things, which I'll talk about in a moment, just to use those views. So they implicitly start using the database in the most efficient way possible without being burdened with why it's the best way. And this can be a great teamwork thing. Get experts in indexes over here on the team, get the experts in this over here, and views are a great way to sort of share some of that code. So that's one way to share code in T-SQL. There are features here that I'm not going to show all the details of, but are there any questions about views? They just save you some typing. Just start with saving typing, and then they just get better after that. Cool. So that's one thing we can do where we get to reuse stuff. What's the next thing we can do? So the next one we're going to talk about, store procedures. Store procedures. They're called store procedures because they're actually stored in the database. We'll just use the designer here to sort of spit this out here, create this real quick. Store procedures are, up till this point, you've seen me type a lot of things. A lot of them were select statements, but also had creates, updates, and deletes. They're a way to can an entire script. So far, you've been just typing in open script windows and pressing F5. Every now and then, you might have clicked save and saved a SQL file, like the one I'm going to put in Slack. Don't let me forget, Harper, to put that script in Slack later. You can save the file, but then you were burdened with having to open it and run it yourself, and you've got an open query there. Store procedures actually save into the database, not into a file on your local system, into the database itself, a complete, what I call script, an entire procedure. That procedure might be as simple as one select statement. It could also be thousands of lines with if statements and group bys and lots of updates and deletes. It could be all in a big transaction. It could be multiple transactions. It could be as big as you need it to be. Smaller is better, but I've seen some pretty monstrous ones, some big ones. And it's a way to put that, and it becomes a feature of the database. It's actually connected. So if you were to back up and restore that database somewhere else, that store procedure goes with it. A file on your laptop would stay on your laptop. So when you do this, just tell it to create a new one. It gives you a whole bunch of green and some blue that I'm going to remove just because I don't want it on there. The create procedure script gets stubbed out for you like this. So the procedure itself needs a name. I will qualify it with DBO. And I'm going to say something that we've already done. Get favorite, I don't want to call it summary. I'm going to call it popularity. I'm going to reuse something we wrote a little bit before. So that gives it a name. You'll notice, by the way, it's a little bit different. When we open up the view, we got a designer, and it had like a save button. When we open up the table, we had a save button. You're not going to get that really here. It's just a script thing. So we're going to do create procedure, and we give it the name right here. If we click save right here, it doesn't save the procedure, it saves this as a file. So that save is not valuable to you. You don't want to click it. It'll mislead you as to what you did. So we're just going to fix it. We got a name in there. Procedures have parameters. They don't have to have any, but most of the time they're going to have one. I'm going to put one on, but I'm going to end up not using it. But I just want to show you how it's possible. For this example, I'm not going to go crazy with the parameters. It's got a lot of text on here, but it's really just defining it like a variable, right? So this would be value. Remember our value from before? Int, and I think I can make sure it's not null. So if you remember JavaScript or anything else, any other programming languages you've been working on, you can kind of think of this kind of as a method name, right? A function name in JavaScript, excuse me. I use the word method for C#, but a function. This is kind of its arguments list. You can put many arguments, but like a JavaScript function, you can have 0 arguments, open paren, close paren. That's fine. And this as begin and end, you can kind of think of this as the open curly bracket for the body of the method. You can think of that as the closed curly bracket. Because it is kind of a method. I mean, what is a method? It's a piece of code we're going to probably reuse. It's got a name, some inputs, and some outputs. That's what a stored procedure pretty much is. It's just got a SQL Server specific set of rules to it. We're just going to remove all that because I don't care about that for this discussion. And in this body, between the begin and end, we just type whatever we want to do. In this case, I'm just going to do a quick query, and it's similar to what we've already seen earlier today. F by product ID, count star as, I'm just going to call this quantity. We already know it's a quantity, but that's going to be easy. And I will do the ordering descending just because I feel like it. Alright? Now, there's a difference here. Every time you've written a script, if you happen to be following along right now, you pressed F5 to run it. Well, if you press F5 right now, it does not run this. It runs the whole thing, which is the act of creating the procedure. So I press F5 if I don't have any boo-boos in my typing or syntax errors. I'm going to take that not null off. Big long red message, and it's not important for what I'm trying to show you. Press F5. It says command completed successfully. It didn't run that query I just typed. It just ran this whole window, which is the act of creating the procedure. You can confirm that by going to create procedure, refresh. There's my new one right there on that list. Alright? So we've got it canned now. We have a query, and it's buried behind a procedure. It does have a parameter on it, but that parameter is irrelevant. I just put it there to show you it's possible. But it is irrelevant right now. What I can do is I can right click here and script that store procedure to an execute window. You can do this when you're new. You would do this to sort of learn how you call an SP. What you'll find is it's really pretty straightforward. This is a bunch of noise. I'm going to get rid of all the noise that we don't need. It's possible to have a return value in the same way as something like JavaScript or C#. You can write your methods to have a return value or just do work and return nothing. By default, it stubs it out as if it has a return code, but it doesn't. It's red squiggly, so I'm going to do the IntelliSense refresh and see if it becomes happier. It is now happier. I am passing in a 0 for that value. Remember, I'm not using it, so it's not really impressive. Now I'll press F5. This, unfortunately, I'm still in the hotel database with no data, but this did work. It did actually run the body of that stored procedure. Alright, so it selected the most popular products. I don't have any data anymore because we're in that new database, but that's a stored procedure. Now they have a lot of features to them. They can be very complex. They can have inputs and outputs of different types. They can have their own return codes, and they can select. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on that. I just want to show you stored procedures exist. They're probably the most popular thing just below tables. You got to have tables in a database. The second most popular thing you'll find in the field are people writing stored procedures. I find people write more stored procedures than they even do views. So you're going to want to become comfortable with that if you're going to want to work on SQL Server. People love their stored procedures. There are differing points of view on whether a database should have a lot of procedures or not. I would just suggest you go in with an open mind and listen to everybody and form your own judgment. One camp says a whole lot of things should be in stored procedures, and the other camp says nothing should be in stored procedures. I'm going to commit to neither and just show you what the feature is and just tell you how we implement it. You can put as many as you want in there, just like functions in an application in a JavaScript or C# or Python. And you can create as many functions as you want. They are obviously, I showed you views first. They just let you sort of do the from and the joins. They kind of give you the from and the join, and they give you a little bit of reuse. Stored procedures are the big one. They're the big massive reuse mechanism, because in the body of them you can do everything. Pretty much everything you'd want to do when any script, no matter how big, can be shoved in here and then reused. So once again, just like a method, you're typing this code once. You don't have to worry about typing this one again. And I believe it's possible, I think I've done it before, but I've forgotten the syntax. I believe I could select from this directly, or select the results into a temp table.
If the store procedure returns a result set, you can. Yeah.
It does. I don't remember the syntax. Do you happen to remember it so I could show them?
Yes, let's start from like the store procedure name. I think.
Is it that easy? I thought it had to be executed.
I think you just do.
It doesn't feel like it's going to work.
I think you do have to put parameters. Yeah.
Yeah, I've forgotten the syntax. Ali might know. He might chime in and let us know. I believe there is a pretty good way we can actually execute and get this out, but I don't remember how to do it. I think there's an issue because you can return multiple record sets. It's not this easy. Like, there's more syntax to it. But I don't want to get stuck on that. I'm going to go back to the simple execute method. This is generally what you're going to do. Most of the time, you're going to be calling SPs from application code. And when we get to, you might talk about it next week, I'll be talking about it later on in the C# stuff. I'll be showing how we can call a stored procedure and pass it parameters. So it's one of those cool things where the C# code will be very small. It'll just have this get favorite popularity, just method name, or stored procedure name, and we'll add in the one parameter for value, and we can call that, and it will stream back to us as many record sets as it needs to. In this case, it's only coming back with one. The stored procedures are the big reuse mechanism. They're a way to take everything you've been typing for the last 2 days and put it somewhere and save it on the server, not just on your laptop, but on the server, and then your teammates get to use it. The sky's the limit with stored procedures. Whatever you can do in that query screen, you can pretty much do with stored procedures. They're really cool. Any questions about them? I mean, it's a pretty high-level discussion. You probably have a million questions, but it's really just details about them. More detail. Yeah.
Can you take a portion of it out? Like, so when you have an item in a table, you can select the specific column.
Yeah.
Could you do the same with the stored procedure?
I need to make sure I understand the question. You can
So
change
like if you have
this.
multiple queries in the procedure, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I could effectively do this. I'll just do a quick this, and I think I have to do alter procedure now. That's how we edit. So alter procedure, value. So now I've just copied and pasted. So now it does the same thing twice. Not really valuable. But now if I do this execute, we're going to get 2 record sets. They're identical because I just copied and pasted. I'll make them not identical just so there's something meaningful, a meaningful difference. And I'm pressing F5 to save this, not Control S, because I'm calling alter and I'm updating the body of that procedure. So press F5 here, now I've got date stamp as a 3rd column. So I can put...
Right, but what I'm saying is, could you just pick date stamp out of that? It's like, give favorite popularity.
Once again,
Got
I believe it's possible, and I've forgotten the syntax for getting it into like a table variable. If Ali wants to chime in and help, that might be nice. I don't want to sit here and stumble in front of you. I think it's possible. I think I've done it before. I don't remember what I did. But I knew it wasn't as easy as select star.
So Ali's asking, why do developers create stored procedures in general?
Code reuse.
Code reuse.
That's what I'm going to say. Code reuse, specifically code reuse in the world of the database. So you can imagine a scenario where you've got a bunch of tables. They've been indexed well. One DBA created a bunch of views that uses those tables well based on those indexes, the way he or she has laid them out. And then the people in the programming language, so C#, Python, whatever it's going to be, when they call the database, they're not burdened with knowing all those details. They don't really know what the tables, how they're designed. They don't know what the foreign key relationships necessarily are. A lot of that's been abstracted away. And if you had 2 different applications, 2 different teams of developers, one writing C#, maybe one writing Visual Basic, one writing Python, they're all sharing the same database, they can all reuse the same code. not by copying and pasting it. They're invoking the exact same code because it's a store procedure that's actually shared on that server. It's all about code reuse.
And especially for set-based stuff, right? So you may have a bunch of logic in your code, in your application code, that does a lot of database stuff, like picks things out one at a time, or selects things. If you have a lot of like massive set-based updates, those are less efficient to do in your application code, so you might want to put those in a store procedure.
Yes, Ali's question was probably also alluding to the fact that there's a lot of caching going on. So when you send queries to a database server, it actually parses out your text and forms what's called an execution plan, and it can cache that plan, and it can cache the data that it's talking to. A lot of performance improvements. These things are all about performance. These databases are designed for huge amounts of data. So one other benefit to calling SPs is every application that every team is calling invokes the same XP. The body of the store procedure, I keep calling it SP. The body of the store procedure is the same, so only one plan gets generated and it gets reused. So there's actually a performance benefit as well as the obvious benefit of not duplicating the code. He was probably alluding to that as well. You'll notice I keep on listing benefits. It's got a lot of benefits. You're going to see store procedures used all the time. Even when there are warring factions about how much they should be used, there are some great times to use them. And the pros are big. There's a huge list. Yeah. So people will give you lots of opinions. Just use your own judgment. You'll hear the pros and cons. It's a lot of pros, though. They're powerful. You've got to give them that. You've got to give them that. They're super powerful. And love the reuse, because this is why we're ending the day. We're ending the day on reuse. So we got views for reuse. We got store procedures.
And you can call store procedures from store procedures. So
Absolutely.
You can reuse them and make them just do certain functions that they're responsible for too.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Harper was saying store procedures can absolutely call other store procedures. You can go pretty deep. They have huge parameter lists. I think they're capped out at 2,000, so you can pass in all kinds of data if you feel like it. I believe you can also pass in tables. You can absolutely pass in tables. In recent versions of the .NET framework, which is the C# that I use, they improved the ability in how we pass tables in. So you can pass sets of data into SPs, and they can work on those sets. The flexibility is huge. Question in the back?
Are there libraries of procedures? Like there's like jQuery for JavaScript. Are there like libraries for SQL procedures that you could like import and like people already designed and just go ahead and use?
That's a good question.
That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that. It sounds like a good idea, but it has a little bit of a pressure not to do that, and that is because it's often operating directly on tables that are proprietary to your product.
Yeah, it would be hard to. I do have a set of scripts that I reuse. There's certain common things that you just do. Find data in your database, like by table name. Find a list of columns by tables. Things are common, but it's all going to be. When you start talking about database, it's like, it is all very specific to your needs,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I apologize, I didn't repeat the question for Winston-Salem. The question was, are there libraries of SPs? And you heard my answer. Not that really that I'm aware of, and I think the reason that drives against it is usually the tables that you're operating on are proprietary to your product. And so that's sort of a defeating thing. But that being said, you can definitely Google and you will find a whole lot of T-SQL in the world that people kind of suggest you at least put in a function, which I'll talk about in a minute, or maybe a couple SPs, but you're not going to find huge library sets because of the proprietary nature of what they do. They're usually not common. They're not shareable code with the planet.
General scripts like find how many rows your tables have and how big they are and how much space they're taking up, and more like admin type stuff like
That's
that.
admin stuff. So Harper's making a good point. When you're a DBA, there's a whole lot of canned stuff that you might do for a lot of your clients or many databases that are in the ecosystem the company you work at. It's advanced stuff, but you can actually run queries against the metadata of the database itself. You can ask it how many tables do you contain and what is their schema, how many rows are in them. You can ask crazy advanced questions about their query plan usage and all these super advanced tasks. So those of you who have been excited the last couple days and think this is cool stuff, it gets much more cooler. This is the, when I say tip of the iceberg, I am really talking like an inch and the other 3 miles is below it. Don't be overwhelmed by that. It just gets really cool. And so there's a lot of admin stuff that if I were still a true full-time DBA, I'd probably have those in my tool belt. I'd have those stored somewhere. And I may even make them SPs, but those SPs don't get called by my app. right? They're called by me manually because what they do is never useful to the end user, but they might be useful to me. That's a good point. There's a whole set of, they call them dynamic management views, I think, and they sound like views. They are literally queries you run, and it's kind of like SQL Server looking at itself in a mirror. You can have it inspect itself and respond to its own performance. Hugely advanced stuff, way out of scope. It's just teaser information in case you're getting excited about databases. You can spend years in this and just keep peeling those layers back and become an expert, and then you're in high demand. You're a specialist, which is really cool. Really cool stuff. So we have another topic. So we've talked about one way to share is views. Another way to share is store procedures. Let's talk about another thing we can do. You can share code in it even another way. I'm going to close this out because we're done with it. Don't need to look at that anymore. You can kind of cheat here. You can actually look at this programmability. This is some of the stuff you can do with SQL on this list. We've looked at SPs. Now we can look at functions. Functions are, there's a lot of them available. I'm not going to talk about all of them, mostly because I haven't actually ever written an aggregate one with my own fingertips. So I'll talk about the other two. Functions are, think of them kind of like really tiny store procedures. They have a lot less features. They kind of back you into a corner. They're a little bit more like a function in JavaScript, but maybe has 1 or 2 lines. They're usually pretty tiny, and they have a specific use case, so we'll talk about them. We have table-valued functions. What does that mean? It means the function returns a table. Whatever you're calling the function with, a table is going to pop out of that. Scalar-valued functions, which is what I'll show you. Scalar, it sounds like a really technical term, but whenever somebody says scalar, usually in the software development world, they mean 1. So scalar value function returns one thing. When I show you C# in about a week and a half, I'll at one point show you a call to a database which is called execute scalar. All it's going to mean is it gets one value out. Not a set, not a table, not a whole bunch of rows, it gets 1. So scalar value function returned 1. And having never written one, I believe aggregate functions probably are things you can use in that group by world. Remember how it comes canned with sum, average, standard deviation, min and max for your group bys and count. My guess is you can write your custom ones there. I've obviously never done it, so I'm not going to pretend to know how to do that, and I won't do it in front of you. But let's do one of the easy ones. Scalar value function. Same thing with an SP. I can just right click on this and click scalar value function. A whole lot of noise here. I'm not going to describe what it means. What I am going to do is delete it. Trim this down a little bit. Very similar. Remember how we saw create procedure? Well, this says create function in the top left. Very similar functionality. I'm going to call mine get full name. I'm going to give it 2 parameters. First name is a varchar. Last name, varchar. You can probably start to feel why I'm typing this. Am I typing it wrong? Give me a second. Why is it unhappy?
I think you just want an @ on your parameters, maybe.
Oh. Oops. That would be the wrong button. Gotcha. I forgot the @ Yes, it's just like a variable. Remember when we declared a variable, and I just forgot the @ sign. So first name, last name, returns. I'll do another varchar. You can probably see by my function name, if I've done a good job as a developer, I've named it well enough, you can probably already tell what this function is supposed to do. What's that?
Off by 1.
What do you mean? What's off by 1?
It should be 101, right? Because you got to put space in.
Technically it should be 102. I'm going to have a comma in there as well. Thanks. Now I like that. He's actually pointing out a good point. Write the code in the highest quality I can. This is going to be pretty straightforward what we're going to try to do. You actually saw me type something like this before. Last name. First name. Let's get the caps right. And get rid of all this white space because that's just annoying. I don't see any red squiggles. I'll run that, complete successfully. I can refresh the list. Expand it. There's my get full name. These are actually easier to invoke. So if you remember earlier, I think it was today, I had, when I was doing the temp, showing you the table variable, I selected out of the customers and pulled out their first last names and then formatted last name, comma, first name. Well, what if we're doing the right thing and storing them separately, but very often in the product we want the full name, but we don't want every developer to have to either rewrite this relatively simple but tedious code. And you could make a mistake here, right? You could accidentally type it that way, and technically that's wrong. You know, generally in the English language, you put spaces after commas, even when we have people's names, so we probably want that space in there. You could accidentally get the names reversed, right? You could do this wrong. Wouldn't it be cool if you went ahead and created a function so that every time you needed to convert from first and last name as separate to one good column in a consistent way across your code? That's what we use functions for. Question?
Yeah, it's kind of like what we talked about in JavaScript. If you put that in all throughout your code 100 different times, and your boss said, "Hey, we don't want last name, comma, first name. We want first name space last name," right? You have to go change it 100 different sort of procedures instead of in one function.
Yep, you have to change it in many places. And think about it. If you had to change, if there are 128 mistakes, what if you found 127 of them? Right? You would fix 127 places in the code, you would confidently push, and approximately 99.3% of the product would work correctly. But then when that other 0.7 occurs, you're going to feel bad about yourself, right? You're going to feel like you let the team down, you made a mistake. So the best thing to do is anytime you feel like you're duplicating code, like the very first time you type the comma, don't worry about it, right? You do the last name, first name, no big deal. But the second time you find yourself doing it, go, this might be a good case for a function. Same thing with JavaScript and C# and those other languages you're going to be talking about. The moment you find yourself typing this thing again, can we put that in a function? Well, here, you'll see me run this, and it worked. Let me get rid of the red squigglies. I passed in Bob as if I had gotten that out of the database, and Smith, and I get Smith, comma, Bob right there in the result. That's exactly what I wanted. Now what's cool about these functions is that you can use them in full-scale queries. Tell Ollie not to panic yet. I will talk about performance. Be careful. So obviously I can do, I'm just going to comment, actually I'm going to copy and paste this. That'll be easy. So here's our select star from customer. Oh, I'm not going to have real customers, am I? I'm going to put this script in the other database. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to script it as a create. I'm going to dump this into the other database I had so that you can see the awesomeness live. I don't want to deprive you of that. So we'll go to Foxtrot. We'll create the same function. Boom. Very easy. So now Foxtrot, which does have customers in it, if I remember correctly, has my function in it. Let's double check we got some customers. There they are. Our old friends, Bob, Alice, and Charlie. We can invoke that function, get full name, in parentheses, pass in c.first name, c.last name. I'll go ahead and give it a nice alias. There we go. Right, so what's happening is as it goes to the customer table, as it finds each customer, finds customer number 1, Bob, it calls out to that function passing his first and last name and gets us back our properly formatted name. So you can see where the value of the reuse is here. I can easily take the star off, clean this up a little bit. Now we have some great, it's not all on the screen, so for everybody's reading benefit, let me do a little multi-line stuff. Press F5. Customer number 1 is Smith, comma, Bob. I'm reusing that code. Right? Another example of code reuse. Functions are awesome. They come in a few different forms. There are table-valued ones, which are a little bit more complicated. There's also a concept of deterministic versus non-deterministic. Some of these functions you can use in certain ways, like in table design. You can actually set up default constraints and they'll call a function. You can set up what's called persisted computed columns and make them based on functions. There's a whole lot of features in this product. I mean, the list is just huge. But a number of those features are based on this foundation of a few things you can reuse and mix together. They're really cool. I'm not going to show the other functions because I have one more thing I want to show, and I don't want to run out of time. But are there any questions, at least about scalar valued functions? they're a little bit closer to what you remember from JavaScript. They even have that feel when you look at the body of them. They're a little bit simpler. That they obviously have inputs, although you don't necessarily have to define types for return values in JavaScript. When we talk about C#, you do. So it actually declares its return type. You'll see me do that a lot in C# in about a week. And this is just simple string concatenation, right? Pretty straightforward. This is actually closer to a JavaScript method or function than even the store procedure. And generally, the functions are there's less to them. They're less feature rich, but simpler and can be reused in some cool ways. There's one more code reuse thing, or at least I categorize it as code reuse, that I'm going to touch on just for a moment. I've even forgotten where it is. I use it so infrequently. There it is. So if you look at the actual tables, and we've looked at these tables often, I've expanded columns many times during the last couple days. We have looked at indexes. All primary keys are an index, so that's always there if you have a primary key. You've seen me create some non-clustered indexes. There's some other stuff on here. You'll notice there's one called triggers. And we're just going to look at this. I'm not going to go crazy with triggers. I actually rarely use them. I shouldn't say that. I don't work in SQL Server enough now in my career to use them a whole lot. Triggers are automatic code. So everything I've showed you so far, you ran with your fingertips. If you open a scripting window and you execute a statement, you press F5, you're obviously executing it. If we were to create what we've already seen, which is a store procedure, and we install it on the server and some application calls it, that's obviously probably an end user doing something on a UI, some web interface that eventually gets called, calls an SP. Functions, as you just saw me use, some other thing is running, such as I showed you the select from customer, and we created those full names. Something is invoking that function whenever it needs it. Triggers are a little bit different. They are a set of code that will run when things happen to data in a table. So they run kind of what I describe as passively. So you can have a store procedure that alters some data in a data table of some sort, any of the tables we have here. And although it didn't explicitly say to maybe change another column in that table, change some value, a trigger, if there's a trigger on the table and there can be any number, it will run other code. Now they're pretty rarely used. The most common example that I've run into is you might have a column on a table of date modified or timestamp or modified stamp, something like that, where the rule is every time you run an update statement, or any create or delete, but update in particular, that you update any row in that table, that row's column, that modified stamp, gets updated with now. That way you always have this accurate date stamp of anytime anybody touched that. Now without a trigger, what this would mean is that of the 500 store procedures that alter that table, that call updates on it, all of them, the developers, all of them have to remember to set that modified stamp every time they call an update. I assure you that is extremely easy to forget. And I found as a developer, anytime I rely on memory, software does not get written correctly. So I try to get away from memory being the key to success. Well, in the database world, triggers are that mechanism. You could at one time set up a trigger that basically said, whenever this table gets updated, let's set that modified stamp to now. And those other 500 store procedures don't need to set it anymore. It automatically gets set on their behalf. Now they're a little bit magical. So there are warring factions on the value of triggers. Obviously I've told you the pros. They keep a lot of stuff in sync that needs to be kept in sync, that's critical. And they do a great job of it. They're guaranteed to run correctly. It's all part of the SQL Server product from Microsoft. They're very reliable, run exactly the way you expect. Very cool stuff. They have a disadvantage. And anytime I've been talking about SQL Server in the last 2 days, you know I obsess over the same thing that all true DBAs obsess over, which is performance. It's our #1 thing. We're trying to deal with databases that are 500 gigabytes, 1 terabyte, huge databases. Not only are they huge, they have to respond to requests in milliseconds. 1/1000th of a second might be our tolerance level, and that can be really tough. One of the disadvantages of triggers is that they run independently of the thing that just ran. So if you were to have an SP that updated a whole bunch of records, it did its work in its own workflow, let's call it that, in its own unit of work. Then the trigger runs, and the trigger also runs, right? So it also did work in addition to that. And so it's kind of like doubling up on how much code gets run and how much data got touched. So their biggest disadvantage is they can be a performance impact. They can be a negative performance impact. So they're touchy, and there are factions that war over this. I want them in the product. I think they're good to solve a number of problems, but I will tell you that generally they're a little bit overused. So it's something you want to use sparingly. Think of it like a spice you put in the food. Yeah, maybe a little bit of jalapeno, but don't go crazy. Otherwise, it's not edible anymore. I'm not going to go deep into them because I haven't typed one from scratch in a long time. I'm just telling you that they're there. Be ready for them. Feel free to Google and experiment with them, but assume that you're going to be using them sparingly, preferably closer to 0. Just because there's also another effect that they have. If a person does write an SP against a table that has triggers on it, that trigger might do something they didn't expect. So imagine that I wrote an SP that has an update statement, and I want to set some string to null for some reason. But there's a trigger which for some other reason always sets that value to a blank string. Well, when I go to run my update statement and I set it to null, and then I look at it, it's not null. And it's scary. Like I ran an update statement and I set it to null and its value is not null. It's because I don't know that there's a trigger who is right after I set it to null blanking it again. So they can sometimes trip up your teammates who are expecting some behavior, but the trigger is overriding that behavior in some way. So be a little bit careful of that. But if you're on the other side of the equation, be aware that might be happening to you. If you are really sure you're setting a value correctly and it's getting like unset or something weird is happening, ask yourself, I wonder if somebody else has a trigger on this table. And you find that out by just going to the table, expanding triggers, and seeing what's in that list. And you'll actually be very delighted on that day to see a trigger there, because the only other option is that you're going crazy.
You're crazy. Yeah.
That's usually what it feels like.
Yeah.
You're pulling your hair out. It's like, where's my data? Every time I set up, it's spent 2 hours setting this field to null, and it's never null. When you finally find the cause, you'll actually be relieved, because it means you're not losing your mind and the software's working correctly. Then you just fix the trigger. No big deal. I've had this happen on a number of occasions. I've pulled a lot of my hair out. That's why I wear a hat. No, just kidding. As far as code reuse, that's the end of that list. Does anybody have questions about triggers in general? I don't actually want to give you an example. We only have a few minutes to go. But in general, any questions about triggers or any of the code reuse things I've talked about?
I think Winston-Salem has like a pretty hard 525
Okay.
thing because they got to get out of that that place where they are.
Yeah.
But if you have like just 2 seconds to show like a quick backup in a store, just an example.
Yes.
I think they
Sounds good.
They requested that.
So I'm going to show you one other thing that is really valuable. That's sort of in the DBA mindset, and it's database backup and restore. So whenever we create these databases, it actually creates a bunch of files on the operating system of different formats that are the proprietary format for SQL Server. And a lot of people think that they can copy and paste those around, but if you do that, you're actually going to get tripped up. If you need to make a database portable, just do a simple backup and restore. It's a very simple process. I've got a database selected, Foxtrot. Right-click, Tasks, Backup. Now this UI is not great. It has been not great for years, forever. The thing I want you to note is in this list here is a path. So see, program files, and in fact I'm going to go ahead and navigate to it. quickly while it's on my screen.
And I'll just say, this is one of the things, you can script out everything that you're doing, like Derek said, in SSMS. This is one thing where, even though the UI isn't great, it is hard to learn all the options of scripting out backups. So this is one thing where the UI kind of is easier sometimes. I mean, I use the UI for this. I use scripts for everything else. To do backups and restores.
So you'll notice the path. It's a big long path. That's the default path. You can change it by clicking these buttons, but since we have a little time constraint, I'm not going to. I'm just going to click OK. The backup is pretty quick. If I press F5, it's obviously there. This database is 3.5 megabytes, nice and small. And you can do the opposite. So you could give a database to a friend. You could pass that back file up to themselves, and you could just right-click up here and do Restore Database. I clicked on Databases and Restore there. This UI is horrible. You just want to click Device, the triple dots, Add, find it. It actually defaults to the same location. There's my Foxtrot database, as I hoped. It twitches as if it was a major event. It does want to restore it to the original name. I'm just going to call it Foxtrot 2. Click OK. Successful. And there's my Foxtrot 2 database with all of its thingies. The tables, the functions, store procedures, they're all there. Even the database diagrams are there. These backups are hugely valuable. When people say they back up their SQL Server database, this is probably what they're doing. There are other advanced ways to do it, but most companies will just do the backup and restore. But you can see that one file as a way to like hand something to somebody. So I advise you to use it as you're sort of tinkering around. If you get your database in a cool state you're happy with, make a quick backup in case you run an update without a where clause, and you quickly want to put it back in a healthy shape. You could restore right over top and gain that data right back. Of all of the sort of non-programming SQL Server things to know, that's the one. Backup and restore. And that's it. It's that simple.
And this would be a good way if you have a desktop machine or something at home and you like want to play on that. If you install SQL Server on that, you could back up from your laptop and drag that back file over to it, a thumb drive or whatever, and then do a restore there, and it's like you'll have an exact copy.
Yep.
Can you like back up to a cloud with that?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah. It is just a binary file. It doesn't have any security built into it. Remember, it's got the schema and all the data. So if you have a bunch of, if you're working at a place and you're storing PII, personally identifiable information like social security number, when you do this backup, it's not encrypted or anything. Anybody can restore it. There is an encryption option? Okay, I didn't know that. That's great news. But I still want to say be careful. By default, it's not. Don't toss that around with social security numbers in it. You don't want to be the person that leaks the million records and ends up on the news. So be careful with that. But for your own play databases, do whatever you want. There's no danger.
The other thing to watch out for that'll bite you every once in a while is the database formats, the database backup formats between versions of SQL Server are not always compatible.
Yes.
and it will kill you. So if you have like SQL Server 2014 on one machine and 16 on another machine, and you back up on 16, you can't restore it on 14 because it has like new features that one doesn't have.
Yeah.
So usually you can restore earlier versions. They're usually kind of like backwards compatible, but they're not forwards compatible. Like you can't.
I'm going to repeat for Winston because it's super important. The backup file formats are not forwards compatible often, so be careful about versions. If somebody gives you a back file but they're in a future version and you're in an older version of SQL Server, it might not restore at all. So just be ready for version conflict. I've seen that many times. It's a good point, Harper. If they have a hard cutoff, then we're all done.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.